Capstone Experience began with the book of Job. My senior year was surrounded by a lot of fear and uncertainty. I was experiencing loss, change, and trial after trial that seemed unfair. People kept telling me that senior year was supposed to be the best year of high school, maybe even of all of school up to this point. You know how when you tell someone about what you're going through and they try to relate with you? Well, I experienced plenty of that this year. People would tell me story after story of their favorite senior year memories, and unfortunately, that just wasn't my experience. I found myself so fearful of both the present and the future. My overwhelming thoughts about the uncertain pushed me desperately to dive into the Word. I was desperate for someone who understood, and I knew that I needed the Lord's peace and wisdom. I figured that my feelings of fear and uncertainty might have been some of the feelings Job had experienced in the Bible, so that's where I started. Job was a man who faithfully served and loved the Lord, but he lost everything. He lost his servants, he lost his sheep, which was his source of income, and he lost his entire family. What's amazing is that even though Job lost everything of value to him, he didn't doubt the faithfulness of God. His love for God was unchanged, even when his friends would question God for him and try to get his faith to waver. This got my attention. I can't really explain it, but I was already experiencing the peace of God through this story, and I knew that I was on the brink of a revelation. That's when I ran across a quote in my devotional that challenged my perspective. In reference to Job's life, it said, "It was less important for Job to know why, and it was more important for Job to know God." Job didn't get answers to all of his questions from God. He didn't find reasons for all of the loss in his life, because that's not what Job needed. What Job needed was to continue pursuing his active relationship with God. This hit me really hard. My perspective on life was faulty. Maybe fair, but faulty. I decided to stop asking God why things were happening in my life and start asking God, what can I learn? What do you want to teach me about who you are, and how can I grow? This is when I embarked on my journey of learning how to better love God and love others. At the beginning of this year, our Bible teachers asked us one question: what do you want? This was the foundation of Capstone. We were told to answer this question, whatever that looked like for each person, and encouraged to step out of our comfort zones to pursue that which we wanted. It was an incredibly difficult task. I remember talking it through with Mr. Butler, and it went something like, I don't even know where to start. Well, what do you want? But I'm interested in multiple fields of study. Well, what do you want? What if this doesn't work out and I have nothing to offer at the end of the year? What do you want? Our Bible teachers wanted us to answer this question as authentically as we could, without the influence of anything other than solely what we wanted. Then we would write an 18-minute speech about our experiences at the end of the year. It was a difficult and overwhelming process at times, but overall it has been so beneficial having Bible teachers who supported our dreams without giving it a second thought. I decided that what I wanted was to discover the field of study that God was calling me to. I felt really drawn toward the field of psychology and the medical field, and this actually really confused me. I couldn't understand what exactly I wanted because these two professions seemed so different. People would make comments to me all the time about how I've got my work cut out for me and I better hurry up and decide, and like, wow, those really don't work together. And then they would just laugh it off, thinking nothing of it. The intentions of their hearts weren't bad in any way, but it really discouraged me because I was trying to discover what I wanted to do with my life, and their comments made me feel like the desires of my heart didn't work together, like something was wrong. And this caused me a lot of stress until I spoke with my mentor about it. She told me that she knew me well, and it made perfect sense. My desire was just to care for people, and it was the difference of caring for people physically or emotionally. With this in mind, I decided to use Capstone as my opportunity to discover which field God was calling me to. I pursued psychology first semester and nursing second semester. My experience with psychology didn't come from Capstone, unfortunately, but from personal experience. I've experienced going to a counselor and walking through that healing process with someone. And I've also been on the other side and offered counsel to someone as a junior high Bible study leader at my church. I was really drawn to this because there was something about just sitting with someone in the midst of their mess that I loved. You could say that I was passionate about it. I genuinely thought that this is what God was calling me to until my experience in the nursing field. I got the opportunity to volunteer at Swedish Medical Center My mom works there, so she spoke with her director and got me the volunteer day. I got up at 3:45 one morning and went to work with her. I got to volunteer on the labor and delivery floor, and it was by far the best experience I had all year. For the first few hours, I just made rounds with the nurses and went room to room, checking on patients and learning a bit about their charting system. And then after this, they let me change into scrubs, which was, which was super awesome. And I got to be a part of some really incredible things that day. I got to observe a circumcision and an epidural. Sorry. I got to, I'm so sorry, oh my gosh. I got to check the vitals of a newborn baby and the glucose levels, which was really cool. And I also got to help out with the class for new mothers. It was incredibly humbling to see the moms and the newborn babies so vulnerable and needing the care of the nurses. But there was one moment in particular when I wholeheartedly fell in love with the profession and decided that I wanted to be a nurse. When I got to witness one of the labor and delivery nurses, Brooke, give one of her patients an epidural. This patient in particular didn't have anybody with her except for her mom, and she was very, very young. And her mom wasn't able to be there during the procedure. She was crying and obviously very scared and experiencing intense pain. Brooke took this opportunity to not only stop what she was doing, but have every nurse in the room stop for her. And she got down on the patient's level and she held her hands and told her that everything was going to be okay. But she wasn't talking about the procedure. She obviously could have told the patient that the procedure was going like it should. Brooke was reminding this young woman of who she was. She told her that she was strong and that she was beautiful and that this baby was so lucky to have her as a mother. It was incredible to witness this interaction between a nurse and her patient. But I also got to witness this type of interaction among the nurses as well. I was walking to the cafeteria to get coffee with one of the nurses, Mary, and we ran into one of the other nurses, Dottie. And Dottie had been crying and was feeling incredibly overwhelmed by her long and exhausting shift. Mary suggested that we pray for her right then and there. It was an incredible moment standing in the hospital hallway, praying over Dottie, while other doctors and nurses were just running by. The spiritual interaction itself was impactful, but I was overall impacted by the community. I witnessed a community in that hospital that went deeper than the profession. That's when I understood that I could be a nurse and still experience community, vulnerability, and relationships. My heart is completely set on nursing, and I can't wait to pursue that next year. But the desires of my heart towards psychology are still there. I still value vulnerability and listening to someone's story as much, if not more, than I did before the beginning of this year. Sometime towards the beginning of the semester, I noticed something really interesting in my life. I was at the grocery store with a close friend, and I somehow got into this conversation with the checkout clerk about church. And this quickly turned into a conversation about her recent divorce and the insecurities that she was struggling with as a result of that. It was a brief but really impactful, deep conversation, and I was able to share my faith with her that day. When we left, my friend told me that she felt like this sort of thing happened to me all the time, especially when we were together. I gave it some thought, and I realized that this was something that happened quite often. Almost everywhere I went, I ended up in these deep, meaningful conversations with people where they would share parts of their story with me. I thought this was really interesting and probably a God thing, so I started to keep track of it in my journal. One time I was at Kendallview Elementary School, where I worked at the time, and I was having a conversation with one of the teachers there, and she ended up being really vulnerable and telling me that a huge part of her story was when her husband walked away from her and her kids. She told me that she was mad at God and hadn't been back to church since then. She knew that I was a believer because we'd talked about it many times before. I listened to her, and I told her that she was loved, and I asked her if she'd be willing to go to church with me sometime and sit with me. She was skeptical, and it took a lot of time, but eventually she came. And now her and one of her sons attend church almost every single week. And there was this other time when my friend Matthew came to visit, and he's been up at this trek program in Granby, Colorado. And he asked if his friend LaVonna could stay at my house for the weekend. This was my first time meeting Lavana, and she stayed over for the weekend, but we ended up staying awake until like 3 in the morning talking about life when I had a math final the next day. And we started off just getting to know each other, talking about life, and then we kind of just let our walls down. I asked her about her family and what that looked like for her, because she's from Florida. And she told me that she had actually lost her dad recently and was struggling to trust God since then. I saw this as an opportunity to be vulnerable, and I told her that I've also struggled with trusting God since we lost my brother when I was younger. It was a powerful night, and to this day she's my best friend and greatest supporter. With both of these interactions, I was able to watch God's work play out, which was incredible. But I also had many other conversations with people that were just genuine conversations about difficult things they're going through that I didn't necessarily get to watch God do his thing. Through these experiences, though, God spoke to me about what it means to leave the 99. He revealed something to me about himself that was so much greater than what I thought I was learning about myself. He reminded me about the parable of the lost sheep. In Luke chapter 15, Jesus said, "Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep to find it?" Jesus was teaching about the relentless pursuit of God, how God would leave the 99 intentionally, but not carelessly, to find the one. It was... I absolutely loved this passage and what it said about God's love for us. But God revealed this to me in a different light. He reminded me that he always pursues the lost, the broken, and the hurting because he loves them. He always makes them a priority. In Luke chapter 15, God found the lost in this parable. In John chapters 4 and 5, Jesus interacted with the broken and the hurting, the crippled beggar and the Samaritan woman. Jesus would put everything on hold to go initiate conversations with these people and to love them and to speak truth to them. And that's because that's who God is, and that's who we're called to be. We're called to be imitators of Christ as beloved children and walk in love, according to Ephesians 5:1. I believe that means prioritizing people and their well-being enough to go out of our way and make time for them, to go out of our way and love them. I learned that most of the time, when given the opportunity, people will share their story. And I learned that more often than not, people do need that hug or that encouragement or that prayer that the Holy Spirit often prompts us to give. This year, overall, has required a lot of patience. I originally wrote in my mission statement that I wanted to grow in my patience this year, and I definitely think that God took that seriously. There were so many things in my life, like Capstone, church, college, graduation. They all required patience. And they're what led me to realize that I needed to be not only a more patient person, but a more trusting person. Trust is always something that I've just struggled with. But God really was leading me to grow in this area. And I was committed to growing in the virtues of patience and trust. Last semester, I really had my heart set on Colorado Christian University, and that's where I wanted to attend college. But there were so many finances and other roadblocks in the way that didn't allow for this to happen. There was one night in particular when I was feeling incredibly discouraged about it all, and it just felt like an unrealistic dream. And that's when I got to put trusting God and patience into practice. I know very well that not only is God trustworthy, but he's deserving of my trust, and that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose, according to Romans 8:28. My friend pointed me to this passage because I was in time of need, and she reminded me to trust the unfailing goodness of God. That wasn't easy, but after a lot of prayer, I was able to go to bed that night with my hands open and my heart letting go of what I couldn't control. The very next evening, purely because of God's goodness, I was able to celebrate with Lavana that CCU was where I would be attending my freshman year of college, and now all 4 years, and I would be living on campus now, which was such a God thing. She said something to me that night that resonated with me so much. She said, letting go of control is so hard, but look at what God does when we do. And we celebrated together. Thanks. When I started my senior year, I had no idea the trials that I would have to go through and the pain I would experience, but also the crazy ways that I would grow. And I wish that this was something that I could share with you guys, all of it. God taught me that I want to be a nurse and that I feel confident that that's my calling. And God also taught me how to better be the hands and feet of Jesus. And God taught me that there is a way to find patience in the waiting, even when it seems impossible, because there's always purpose in the journey. Like, God doesn't take us through these things for nothing. I'm so thankful for the overall experience of Capstone. I'm thankful for the support of my Bible teachers and our senior class, the way that we've all cried together and stressed out together and supported one another. I'm thankful for the ways that God connected these different areas of my life to teach me and to grow me as a person. And I'm so thankful for the things that I learned this year. These are things that I cherish and that I will carry with me through life. I'm so excited to carry them on to my next stage of life and see what else God has in store for me. Thank you.